All right, continuing on with part 3 of chapter 23 regarding social work practice with American Indians, we were talking about education. Now, what happened in the United States wasn't unique just to the United States. It also happened in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and other countries of that nature. And the story was pretty much the same across even, continents there. That children were removed from their homes and put in these schools far away. Sometimes children were able to go home during the summers. Other times that wasn't something that was allowed. Visiting might be allowed if the family could make that far of a trip. In other situations, it wouldn't be allowed. And very sad to say that not in all, but in many of these boarding schools, conditions were harsh. And many reports come in terms of neglect and abuse, physical abuse, and sexual abuse as well. Now, not every Indian, not every American Indian experienced physical and sexual abuse. There are some, those that kind of willingly converted to Christianity and found the white person's God and embraced that, generally were treated better than the others. And so there were some Indians who would say that boarding school was a positive experience. They found God, and they gained some skills. But these weren't schools that were going to prepare anyone to go on to college. The best that was thought possible would be for an Indian boy to become a good field laborer, a good farmhand, kind of a menial labor type of position. And for the Indian girls, it would be to be a domestic, to do work in someone's house. There was no idea or conception that someone might go on to be a teacher or a doctor or a lawyer or any other type of profession like that. It wasn't until about 1975 when the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act was passed that the federal government's involvement in sponsoring boarding schools came to an end. People began to see the devastation and understand in a small measure the impact that it was having upon the Indian communities. When a child would graduate from a boarding school, after having been gone sometimes for 5, 10 years, they would go back to their Indian home, and oftentimes they had completely forgotten how to speak the language, didn't know the customs. And so they became like a stranger to their own family and to their own tribe, not fitting in the white man's world and no longer fitting into their own Indian tribe. So there was a lot of trauma that is still being felt by people who maybe they themselves now weren't in a boarding school, but it could have been their parents or their grandparents. And just the loss of history and the loss of tradition and the loss of how Indians would parent. Just so much was lost during that time that the trauma continues down from one generation to another. I want to move on now to health and mental health issues. Accessing health, whether it's for physical or mental health, is one of the biggest problems for Indian nations now in the country. Now, some tribes do have a combination of relying upon traditional plant medicines and healing ceremonies. Many of them incorporate that with Western styles of medicine as well. But just having access to health care is a real problem for many of the rural Indian reservations, and there's great health disparities. The life expectancy, I think I mentioned this before, of American Indians is significantly lower than for non-Indians. And that goes for both men and for women. There's quite a difference. And a lot of that goes back to the availability of health care. Cancer, heart disease, accidents, and diabetes, those are the 4 leading causes of death among American Indians in the United States. Now, one of the things that is supposed to be being provided because of the treaty agreements is health care. So this is an area of a lot of controversy and over a lot of struggle, because the care that is supposed to be being provided as per the agreements of the treaties in many ways is not happening. The Indian Health Service, that's the IHS, that's the agency of the federal government that is supposed to be delivering these health care services to the tribal communities. But they only reach about 60% of the eligible population. So there's a huge part that's not being reached yet. Okay, this is the end of part 3. When we come back, we're going to continue on a little bit about health, and then we're going to move into just a couple things about family, and then continue on from there.